I had fallen asleep at night with my fan running and woke up freezing. I turned it off. Not long after, I woke up hot and turned it back on. This happened several times. The last time, I woke up hot once again, and the moment I opened my eyes, I heard the pull of my fan and looked up to see it slowly start speeding up. I said, "Thank you," and fell back asleep. In 2012, my stepfather overdosed on heroin and dropped dead in the hallway in his condo apartment. My mom had to move out shortly after since they were already behind on mortgage bills. A few months later, my lease went up and I was barely making ends meet and couldn't find a new roommate. My mom offered me the key to the condo apartment to squat for a few months until I saved up enough for my own apartment. I took the offer and moved into the condo apartment. After a month or so, I was asleep in the living room and I had this dream of him standing in the hallway facing the living room. He was looking at me and smiling/laughing. Even made a stupid joke and everything. It wasn't disturbing at all, just bittersweet. Then I suddenly woke when I felt some pressure stroking down my head and back. There was nothing around me and it tripped me the hell out. As a skeptical person that doesn't believe in the paranormal, it has to be some kind of sensory hallucination. It was still nice to see him in my dream once again though. Made me tear up typing this. Rest in peace, Darren. Mildly interesting fact. He dropped dead on July 13th in 2012. On a Friday the 13th. Moved from the US to the UK and our parents bought an old beat-up house. It still had lead pipes for the water. Nightmare all on its own. Anyway, work proceeded on the house whilst we lived there. We started seeing bright lights in the corners of rooms at night. Footsteps on floorboards, the house had carpet. I was about 6 at the time and started getting woken up in the night by a little girl who would dance on my chest of drawers for me. I was frickin' terrified. My mum just fobbed it off as me dreaming. Workmen complained of strange things happening like tools being moved and odd feeling like being watched. After about a year of this, my eldest sister's friend stayed overnight. She woke the whole house up screaming, saying a little girl had been in her room. She had apparently pulled her from the bed. The friend left the house and refused to ever come back. Mum decided she might need to do something about it and got some advice. He suggested my mum and the whole family should treat the presences as part of the family. So when we got home, we shout, "Hi, we're home. Did you have a good day?" Over time, the house settled and we didn't get any more trouble. We also found out a little girl did die in the house of asthma. My parents still live there and it is a beautiful homely place now. I live in a house built in the 1800s. It survived the 2 world wars and it's seen some shit, I imagine. One of the previous owners had 2 sons, who both committed suicide. A lot of strange stuff happens. The animals, dog and parrots, will wake up from their naps and follow something with their heads just as they would follow me if I walk around. Also, before I switched rooms in the house, my brother had a room and he refused to sleep there as he would hear voices. He slept with my parents, he was a child, until the day he got my old room and since then has slept in that room without problems. There's also a whole floor we don't use and I sleep in the attic, and I pass through that floor to get to my attic. Weird explanation, but it's a weird house. And I have a motion-activated light there that goes on as I'm walking the stairs to that unused floor. It would also switch on in the middle of the night while nobody is walking under the motion detector. Also, there's cold spots. I lived in a house that seemed to be haunted by doppelgangers. Every event that happened never involved some mysterious figure, but a known person being in a place where they should not have been. Here are a few examples. I was a teenager at the time, and I was instant messaging my girlfriend at the time with my webcam turned on. I had the viewer up so that I could see myself in the webcam. Behind me, there was the stairs leading up, left of camera view, and the entrance to the living room, right of camera view. My younger sister would typically fall asleep every night on the couch in front of the TV and make her way up to bed in the middle of the night. At one point in my webcam view, I saw my sister leave the living room and go up the stairs. The thing that struck me as odd was that I didn't hear anything. It was an older Victorian house, so the wooden floor and stairs were loud as fuck. Without saying anything to my girlfriend, I got up and looked into the living room and there was my sister passed out on the couch. I sat back down and asked my girlfriend if she had seen anything in my camera. She said, "Yeah, I just saw your sister go upstairs. My family was all getting ready to go somewhere. I was sitting in the car with my mom and we were waiting for my sister who was still in the house. After a bit she comes out and gets in the car and just looks at me like, 'What the fuck?' I asked her what was wrong and she said that just before she walked out of the house she thought I was still inside, so she yelled up the stairs, 'We're leaving?' And apparently, I yelled back, 'Okay, I'll be down in a minute.' My mom woke up to someone tapping her foot and she said someone was standing at the end of her bed who faded out after a couple seconds. She said it looked like me. I had an encounter where I woke up and felt like someone was under my covers laying up against me. When I said something, my blanket visibly deflated and I no longer felt anything. I include this with doppelgangers because though I didn't see what I felt under the blanket, it looked like my girlfriend would have laid against me. When I was 22, I was in the military and I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. It still took like a year after the diagnosis to separate from the military, but I went home on leave for the holidays about a month after the diagnosis. Anyone who has insulin-dependent diabetes typically carries around some sort of kit. Mine is black zip-up pouch and it has a glucometer, insulin pen, needles, and alcohol pads. Right after I left home to head back from leave, my mom texts me to ask if I'm missing my diabetic kit. I look and I'm not. She sends me a picture of a diabetic kit and asks if I know it. I've never seen this kit before in my life. Apparently, my sister went into her bedroom and discovered it outside of her window propped up like someone had set it there. Oh, also, her bedroom is on the second floor. Nobody else we know has diabetes. A lady who had 2 husbands die on her in the same house. That's the house my dad decides to buy. The first one hung himself from the rafters in the garage and the second one fell ill and died in his bed in the basement. I lived in the basement room and often just felt like I was being watched all the time. The bedroom in the basement has a secret storage room behind a bookshelf with a locking latch. I would always wake up to find the door wide open. It happened so often that I would wake up cold and routinely go shut and lock the latch of the door in the middle of the night. For the longest time I thought it was my dad or stepbrothers messing with me, but it wasn't. My stepbrother now occupies that room and he says it still happens to him and that he's even seen it open on its own. There are no air vents or anything, so I've ruled out wind. Also in the garage, I always see light coming from under the door through the crack only to open the door to pitch black. I've heard sounds coming from the garage only to find saw blades clanging together and slightly rotating in their place on the whole storage wall. Didn't think anything of it at first, but when you find shit moving on more than one occasion, it makes you look over your shoulder at the rafters and wonder. I lived in a house for about 5 years that was haunted, but not in a malicious way. In a shitty roommate kind of way. I'd come home to the windows on the second floor being open when it was raining. The food containers were open in the fridge that I hadn't touched yet. The worst was that the ghost hated clocks. She hated them. I had antique cuckoo clocks that had worked for 50 years and would just stop. Brand new wall clocks that ate through batteries like it was candy. My watch ended up on the floor one morning, and the crystal shattered, even though I knew I slept with it on. The one that pissed me off the most was that I got a brand new Kit Kat clock for Christmas, and the bitch threw it off the wall. I was cooking and out of the corner of my eye I saw the cat freaking fly. Turned around and it was across the kitchen. Broken. It was brand new. Man, she was a bitch. My uncle's house out in a very eastern part of New York was said to be haunted due to the family that used to own it in the 1800s decided not to give it to the stableman and sold it instead. He and the maid were said to have haunted the place. We always used to joke that you would hear people or things moving at night, but since the house is so old, we used to just laugh it off. My uncle's friend had her and her sister stay over the house one night, and the friend noticed a maid bringing towels down the stairs when she woke. She saw the maid again, bringing what looked like a percolator, down the stairs. She was so impressed by my uncle hiring staff. He is a neurologist in NYC, so he had a habit of spending a little bit extra. She went back to bed and woke up later downstairs to see my uncle and his friend just chatting. She asked where the maid went and she thought that the maid was cooking breakfast. My uncle had no idea what she was talking about and asked what she looked like. The sister explained and he laughed. Walked her to the living room and pointed to an old picture. She said that was the woman. My uncle replied, "Yeah, she has been dead for about 100 years. So I used to live in a big house, 6 bedrooms, for baths, basement, etc. by myself. I was there as a hiring perk and to look after the place for my boss who lived out of state but owned the home, one of those win-win situations. The first couple of months were fine, but when winter came I started hearing things coming from the second floor. I lived pretty much exclusively on the first floor. It started with little bumps and bangs coming from above, where I had my computer set up, and progressed to distinct footsteps coming and going across the second floor. I had been up to the second floor to check up on it from time to time, and I knew that there were unfinished areas up there. One place always stuck out, an unfinished room that was a sort of walk-in closet for one of the upstairs bedrooms. It was attached to the garage attic, completely unlit. It was open when I went up to investigate the noises. I shut the door and locked it. 2 nights later, more noises. Footsteps leading from the unfinished room to the bathroom. Then nothing. The worst part, the door. The door that led to the unfinished room would not stay closed or locked. I tried everything. Eventually, I pushed the bed up against the door to keep it from opening. That seemed to work. A few months went by without the door coming open, but I would find it unlocked all the time. As time passed, I would hear noises all over the house. Mostly footsteps, but the occasional thump with no explanation. I cannot explain how horrifying it is to hear little taps up and down the hall from the other side of a bathroom door during your morning shower. I eventually moved out, but another employee moved in to take my place. His stay there only lasted about a month. The story he told me is that he was shaving one morning before work and he heard a slam like someone dropped a heavy stack of books right outside his bedroom door, then heavy footsteps like someone running down the hall. He won't stay there anymore and no one in the company will live in the house. Super late to this, but I had the best haunter ever and miss my first home because of this. I grew up with a cat, Boots, who was just a year my junior. Boots was motivated only by food and spent his later years sleeping on my parents' bed until someone came home. Then he'd jump off the bed with a thunk-thunk of his front and back paws hitting the ground and run to his food bowl to beg. He had to be put down when I was 18. My parents moved out of my childhood home during my first year of college. I went back a few times before it sold. Every time, I was certain I felt a cat's presence. Like, I'd hesitate my step because I was sure a cat just walked under my legs kind of thing. Also, upon walking in, I'd always hear a thunk-thunk, like Boots jumping down to beg for food. My mom and I went back for the last day my family would ever be in that home, and I told her on the way what I'd experienced. To my surprise, she had the exact same feeling. When we walked into the house, thunk-thunk. We exchanged shocked glances and confirmed we both heard it. I went and sat in my empty room while my mom got the final things together, and while my eyes were closed I had to force myself to not pet a cat that I felt walk up to me, because I knew logically he wasn't there. Before leaving, we stood in the hallway outside my parents' bedroom, hugged each other, and cried, saying bye to my first home. I said I thought Boots was still around, and suggested we take his spirit to the new house. She agreed, so she called out, "Bootsy!" from my parents' room. Thunk-thunk. We both heard it. I don't think he came with us. He never liked car rides. But I hope the owners since us have enjoyed their ghost kitty. He was a good boy. I lived in one when I was a teen, along with my parents. Several instances come to mind. We were remodeling an old farmhouse and had been there a couple of months before witnessing anything. One day I was underneath my truck, which was supported by only a jack. Stupid, I know. I was in the middle of working on it with no good reason to get out at that moment. Suddenly the overwhelming urge to get out from underneath overwhelmed me. No sooner than I got out, the truck fell to the ground. The jack had slipped. Freaked Dad out, he thought I was under it. When Mom got home, we mentioned it, and she started crying, sobbing pretty hard. It turns out the previous owner died in the driveway under a vehicle in that spot. I would often see moving shadows, and strangely hear music from the upstairs area. The windows of the old house were caulked shut, and blackbirds would often get caught between the panes. We ended up replacing all the windows, but we had to break 3 inside panes to get them out. One of the more disturbing things happened when my mother was cooking breakfast. She turned away to get something out of the cabinet, and when she turned back around, all the forks set out were bent straight up. This might get a little buried, but I'll share anyway. So 2 weeks before we moved, my dad and I toured our house, and I noticed this guy was painting the water heater, which I thought was weird as fuck, but I was like 10, so whatever. Anyway, we moved in on a Wednesday, and my parents let me stay home from school until the following Monday and preoccupied me with coloring books and a new doll house. In my brand new crayons pack, there literally wasn't a blue crayon, like it was a 64 pack, but there were only 63 crayons in it. One day, I went downstairs into the basement, and my blue crayon was next to the hot water heater. Scribbled on there, it said, "Hi Fit Nurse 6, Kevin." I was so confused. I started school, and my new classmates were like, "OMG, do you live in Kevin's house? Your house is gonna be haunted." It turned out that Kevin was a little 8-year-old boy that lived in our house prior to us, and he got hit by a car in the front yard. He would write notes if you left out a pen and paper, open and close doors, adjust the thermostat, the kind where you had to turn a knob, and always turn on Christmas music when it was that time of year. Smiley face. We had a swing set in the backyard, and even on the hottest, calmest days of summer, only the left swing would be moving back and forth. We had this dumb cat that I would lock in my bedroom at night, and every morning, my parents would open the door and let him out, then close it back. One night I woke up and the cat was meowing at the door, and it woke me up, but the door opened and the cat hissed and ran out really fast. I asked my mom the next morning why they didn't close my door, and they said they didn't open it. The last story is when I was very upset and nearly suicidal one year during Christmas break. The police just randomly showed up at my house. The policeman said he was patrolling our neighborhood and felt like something was wrong at our house. I'm absolutely certain Kevin had something to do with it. When I was younger, I used to take naps upstairs, but by the time I was 8 years old, I absolutely refused to go upstairs. The upstairs had 2 large closets, attics. They ran from one side of the upstairs all the way to the other side on both sides. It was essentially a crawl space that was maybe 30 feet long. It started one day when a friend and I went crawling from one side to the other with flashlights like kids normally do. Then I saw a girl sitting there in the corner acting like she wanted to play with us. I know a lot of people say when they see a ghost they aren't scared, just interested. Nope. I was beyond terrified. This girl looked normal, had blonde hair, a nice dress, and seemed friendly. I stayed silent, kept crawling behind my friend, and got out of the closet. Told him what I saw in there. He said he didn't see it, but felt like he didn't want to go back in. Then my parents would occasionally send me upstairs to get something, and when I would get up there I would see the doors swing open, as if they were trying to get me to come inside. I would lose toys and wouldn't be able to find them anywhere. Suddenly, my parents would be fishing out Christmas presents out of the attic, and we would find some of my toys in there. I remember being 8 years old. My parents are asleep still in the morning, and I leashed up my dog to go take on the monster in the attic. My dog, usually up for anything, refused to go off the top step into the attic. My parents never believed me with all the weird things that happened in that house. I would get blamed for things that happened all over the house. Leaving lights on, toys all over, things I knew I didn't do. Well, anyway, we move out of there when I am 10. Not a week passes before the new owners call us up and ask if the house is haunted. Their daughter sleeps upstairs. She says that she has been playing with a blonde-haired girl at night. My parents laughed at how crazy these new homeowners must be. To make an already long story short, the girl started appearing in other parts of the house for them. They kept in contact with us. They would look over while watching TV and see the girl sitting on their daughter's lap, etc. They looked up on the computer the past owners of the house, found an old dressmaker that lived there, and yep, a picture of the little girl wearing one of the ladies' dresses. The family that moved in there was absolutely torn apart by the events. Got divorced, and Dad stayed living in the house and ended up taking his own life in that house. I'm not exactly sure what to believe since a lot of the paranormal occurrences happened to my dad, but I definitely saw and heard some creepy shit while living in a house in my teens. We'd very frequently just have a sense of anxiety and foreboding in the house, which on its own isn't paranormal, but certainly made it very uneasy staying there. I read somewhere that radon exposure can cause anxiety, and the house did have a radon problem, so maybe that could have been it. But I also would hear footsteps around the house when I was the only one there, and just constantly felt like someone was watching me. My dad got the worst of it and claimed he could hear sounds coming from the basement at night. His bedroom was right near it, whereas mine was upstairs. So I never heard any of it, but I'm an extremely deep sleeper. Then the traditional slams, bangs, and crashes throughout the house. My dad also claimed he would hear knocking on the cellar door. Sometimes he would hear a woman screaming. Supposedly, every family who had ever lived there experienced something. There are 3 distinct things that stand out. 1, the night before we moved out, my dad claims he woke up because he felt a sudden hard tapping on his head. 2, my brother's girlfriend was staying over and my dad and me were gone. We came back to find that his girlfriend's daughter was terrified because she saw a shadow in the corner of the room. I chalked it up to a kid's imagination running wild. 3, one time my dad was practicing with his band in the basement and was expecting me back from a Christmas party. He claims he heard heavy footsteps from upstairs and thought it was me, so he went upstairs to greet me and nobody was home. I got home about a half hour later. It got to the point where my dad had the house blessed, and the priest claims to have been terrified and refused to go into the house at first. This was around the time I was becoming an atheist, so I didn't really believe in any of that, but I definitely experienced the uneasiness and occasional random noises, but never experienced any of the screaming or knocking my dad claims to have heard. At one point we had some people from TAPS associated with, but not on the Ghost Hunters show, visit us and do a sweep of the house. We got some of the obvious orb pictures which both I and my brother thought were dumb as hell, but at one point, being a bit of an edgelord thinking I had psychic powers, told them to take a picture in one specific spot. The result was an image of what appeared to be a ghostly bust of a person with a demented face. We tried to explain it as a reflection from the washing machine, but it looked too much like a person. If I can dig up the image, I'll post it, but I'll have to dig through my dad's Facebook account. We also have an entry on the website, The Shadowlands, that I submitted. Look for the entry for Quobog Avenue. P.S. There was one hilarious instance where I came home from school one day and immediately felt the uneasiness and felt like I was definitely being watched. My blood went cold and I was starting to feel a bit panicked. I turned around and my grandmother was there and started laughing her ass off at how she had scared me. She had been there the whole time and I somehow walked right past her without seeing her. Miss you, Gram.